When is the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago, of course. The second best time is now. You have all heard me talk about areas of my career when I've been a poor leader. And then now, this place that I'm trying to get to and where I excel in the art of leadership. I'm not there yet, but I'm on the journey. But let's be honest for a minute. It's easy to stay in the poor leadership mode. And there's a lot of them out there. But as my wife always says, when you know better, you must do better. And then, of course, me being who I am, to add to her thoughts, I like to put everything to timelines. So that timeline is now. I'm your host, Steve Baumgartner, and my mission here today and the mission of the Fire Forged Leader podcast is to serve you through providing knowledge and tools around leadership strategies on three primary battlefronts. Those battlefronts are simply in the workplace, out in the community, and most importantly, with your family. Now let's get to work.
Leaders are not born in a womb. They are forged through heat, pressure, and a whole lot of sweat. The Fire Forged Leader podcast serves the audience through exploring leadership at work, in the community, and with the family, using a practical perspective and real-life experiences from the host, Steve Baumgartner, and his guests in The Forge. Now, it's time to enter the Forge with the Fire Forged Leader.
Hey, before we get started here today, I want to give my friends over at Black Rifle Company a quick shout out. These guys are doing some amazing things over there. They take data, your data, and connect consumers with your data, which generally leads to a 10 times growth for a company. So I'd like you to go check them out. If you could use that kind of growth in your company, I'm sure you can. But go check them out at blackrifle.company. Not to be confused with the guys who make the silly commercials and the great coffee. So a couple things that I could use from you for this podcast is, number one, go out there and give this show a rating. And then follow it up by giving the show a review so other people know why you listen to this show. And then last but not least, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on a single episode. All right, are you guys ready to get into it? Let's start out at looking at what I believe are the 5 worst traits that keep people from leading well. And I'm going to tell you, you're going to quickly notice that many of them intertwine. The first one, and the worst for me, is micromanagement. I absolutely do not thrive in this environment at all. You know, for me, I see it as a lack of trust in the team, a lack of trust in me to perform tasks. You know, it really, when you look at it, micromanagement demoralizes employees. It stifles their development. It stifles their creativity. It's absolutely horrid, and that's why it's my number one. Number 2, lack of transparency. Once again, I see lack of transparency as a lack of trust again. It's when you're not open or honest about your decisions and the state of affairs within the organization as a whole. And when you don't have transparency with your people, it really leads to a mistrust and an insecurity among all your team members. And I will tell you, I use this a lot, but I'll tell you, when you don't have transparency, In that absence of information, people will fill the gap. And it's generally not true. Number 3 is inflexibility. So this is when, as a leader, you're unable to adapt to new transformations, new information, changes in environment, or even the needs of your team. And when that happens, it hinders progress. It hinders progress of the individual, yourself, your team, the organization, and it really stifles innovation. It's why companies haven't changed from the 50s. Now stop and think about that, right? Inflexibility. Are these really the times when you want to be inflexible? We need to be able to adapt to changes and new information. And we need to do it at a rapid speed in today's environment to remain competitive. All right, number 4, selfishness. That's really, it's self-explanatory, really, right? But it's when you put your own pursuit of personal glory or your personal welfare above your team or organization. When you do that, when you talk about how much money you make or your big fat bonus or how many toys you have in your garage, you really start to damage the morale. And you lead to what everybody calls that toxic work environment. And then the last one is indecisiveness. So, indecisiveness, once again, I think it's self-explanatory, but it's when leaders struggle to make decisions that can cause delays, and ultimately it makes their team frustrated as hell. And it generally stems from a fear of making mistakes. But once again, it slows down momentum of the team. It slows down creativity. And ultimately, I'm going to tell you, if you don't make a decision, someone else is going to make that for you. So let me give you a couple examples, in my world on all of these different things. So, I've been in all of these spots before. I've been the recipient of all of these traits and the giver of some of them. And I led my teams like this. Teams, I use that loosely when I think back on it, but I led like this because it was really what I knew growing in my career. That is what I saw. That is what I experienced in my career. I saw micromanagement. I had a boss that I had to call every time before I made a decision. I've also had bosses who were indecisive. And that's absolutely horrid as well. It's at the total other end of the spectrum. I've had bosses that sat there and told me about all the toys that they had and how I was going to affect their bonus and everything else. I've had bosses that didn't tell us things, they just told us to do them. I've had bosses who their way was the only way, they were inflexible. And every one of these environments, people, every one of them has got me to the point that I wanted to leave an organization. But I don't fault them for that. I did some of those myself. I was a micromanager. I was I wasn't indecisive. I was inflexible. I've always been pretty good at making a decision, even the wrong ones. But I've had many of those traits myself. But as far as my journey goes, I hit a couple of turning points in my life. Mine happened to be pretty much a couple of distinct examples. Two that I want to call was being just in the presence of two amazing people. And a huge shout out to both John Ross and Joel Miller for this. I worked for these two men back to back, and they were the best leadership examples that I've had in my career. Well, it wasn't back to back, but I worked with Joel while I worked for another gentleman. So we were more of partners at that point in time, and then I went to work for him later. But then I also had a tremendous experience when I did a couple of workshops with Echelon Front. And I met Jocko Willink. And I got to work with his teams, and I started listening to him and his leadership examples. And in all of this, I realized that the things that I learned were not the right way to lead. Actually, many of them were exactly the opposite of how you should lead. So that sent me on a course. It sent me on a journey. And I started to research and put these new methods that I was learning into practice in my workplace, at home, with my kids, leading at home, in my marriage. And once again, to quote my wonderful wife, when we know better, we must do better. And to quote myself, the time is now. So, like I said, I've been very blessed with the experiences that I've had in life, both the negative and the positive lessons. And you've probably got one eye cocked right now, right? Going, what? You're blessed with negative experiences? Hell yeah, I've been blessed with negative experiences. You know, I've learned something from both of those. I've learned from the negative what I don't want to be like anymore after the scales were pulled off of my eyes. And I've also learned from the positive lessons because they were tremendously impactful to me. So I want to quote my professors in BJJ. They always say either you win or you learn, right? So when I had those good experiences, I was winning. When I had those bad experiences, I was learning. And the trick really is to learn, right? It's to learn from both of these models. And from the negative, the trick is not to become bitter from the experiences, but use them as a learning experience. Like I said, I don't blame these other leaders that I had in my life. I understand that I was a very poor leader in many different arenas for a very long time. And I don't see myself as a bad leader today. I see myself as a bad leader then. But I also understand I led that way because I didn't know that there was another way. And I'm going to guess that these gentlemen were in the exact same boat. So now let's talk about what it looks like to start to transform that journey into some decent leadership and even good and excellent leadership. So we always want to think about leadership as something mystical, something that's this mecca point, that it's super complicated and nearly unachievable. But I don't think it needs to be, folks. So here's my short summary. All right, I'm going to start off with that. My short summary is to lead well, there's a couple of things. It's my job as a leader to create a vision of the future. So when I talk about creating a vision of the future, and I've talked about this before, it needs to be clear. It needs to be something that people can see. That's my responsibility. I need to do that as a leader. I also need to believe that this vision is obtainable. I need to believe that in my heart of hearts. And the reason for that is because I need to have that type of enthusiasm when I explain the vision to my team. I also need to understand that my people are the ones who are going to achieve the vision. And I am simply just a tour guide to help them on that journey and make sure that they don't lose sight of the vision when they're working. It's up to me that they understand and believe in the vision and are ready to march towards it. So in all this, you probably noticed that I used a lot of I statements. This is fully intentional. To lead well, it starts with me, no one else. Absolutely no one else. It is on me. Now, to be a good team leader, it starts with the team. And I want to make that very, very distinct. To be a leader, it's all on me. To lead a good team, it's about the team. Now, on to the tactical side of things. Let's flip those behaviors over. First, micromanagement. My absolute number one worst list item out there. The cure is simply trust. It sounds easy, right? It sounds easy. Oh, yeah, I trust you today. But it's not that easy in reality. So, how do you do this? How do you trust people? Well, you got to start small and you build wins. You have to place in good checkpoints, right? You don't want to give someone a huge project right out of the gate and tell them you'll check up with them in 3 months. No, you probably want to check in with them every 2 weeks to make sure things are on track. This is new for them too, if you've been a micromanager. Or if their last boss was a micromanager. So you need to put in good checkpoints. And at those checkpoints, make sure you challenge these people, but you need to praise them even more for the job that they've done so far. Yes, you may need to course correct, but you also need to take that upon yourself. If you need to course correct, look at it as a point where you can take some ownership for it, get them course corrected, praise them for the work that they've done, and let them move on. The second one, lack of transparency. The cure for this one is to be open with your team about everything that you can be. Now, I've learned this from a peer of mine, and it's something that I still struggle with today because it seems like you can't give enough information at times. But I learned this from a peer of mine, and his name's Nate. When you are open with your team, and that's the norm, there's going to be times that there's things that are confidential or things that you can't tell them. But if the norm is that you're open with them, when you come to these situations, you simply say, hey, That's something that I can't tell you, but I need you to trust me. And more times than not, that's going to work out in your favor because you're open about everything else. So you know this one's serious, right? There's a trust relationship there because you have shared most of the information with them. Number 3 was inflexibility, right? So my suggestion here is just try it. Just try it. Try something that your team recommends. And of course, I'll put the caveat on. Only try it if it makes sense to you, right? You need to understand it, have them explain it to you. If it makes sense, go ahead and try it. Implement something new. Now, I'm asking something big with this right now, right? You have to have an open mind, and this is something that you've struggled with. You need to have an open mind. There's that old adage that 2 heads are better than 1. And there's a lot of truth to that. When you get people inside a room, and a small group of people who know an operation, who know a process, who know about what you're going to talk about, and you set an expectation and you tell them that they're the experts and you allow them the chance to solve a problem, they will surprise you. I guarantee you. But let's stop and get back to this inflexibility thing, right? Stop and think about it for a minute. If you think your idea is the only or best one every time, how damn conceited are you anyways, right? Now, when I point at the screen, I'm pointing directly back at myself because I've had these times. I've struggled over this one. All right, number 4 was selfishness. Leaders, I'm going to tell you right now, this one absolutely pisses me off. No one, absolutely no one, needs to know about that nice car you're making payments on, that BMW, that Lexus, that Mercedes, whatever. I don't care. Nobody cares about your payments on that. What people care about is how are they going to feed their family? How are they going to make their house payments? How are they going to make their car payments? That's what they care about. How are they going to get to their kids' ball games? Things like that. No one in the world needs to know about how their failure is going to affect your bonus. Same thought pattern here. Now, on the flip side of that, right? If you grow as a team, all of that stuff's going to work itself out. The power is in the team. Now, one of my positive examples of leadership in my career, I can't remember the scenario around it, but I will remember till my grave about him telling me how his people, and I'm going to use air quotes here, got screwed, and he got a fat bonus, and instead of going out and spending them on himself and his family or buying a nice car or whatever, he split the entire bonus up between his team and kept nothing for himself. Don't be selfish. Anyways, number 5, indecisiveness. Now, this is one that I can't say that I have ever suffered from much. I am a very decisive person. My wife at one point in time, it was when we were going to purchase a house for when we took this last move. And, sometimes she had complained a little bit about how decisive I was. But when we were in the house market, we looked at 20 houses in 3 days. And at one point in time, my wife is like, actually, it was in this house right now. Uh, my wife come up to me and she's like, Steve, what the heck is wrong with you? I'm like, I don't know. What are you talking about, honey? She's like, you have not made a decision. I need you to make a decision, right? And it was probably the one time in my life that I was purposefully not making a decision because I wanted to make sure that she was going to be happy. But once she told me that, I looked at her. I said, you ready for me to make a decision? And she's like, yes, let's get this over with. So I went out, and we were in the house that we bought. And we went outside, and I told the realtor, I said, put in an offer. And we put an extra $40,000, you know, to, uh, to bid back and forth. And I said, let's do it right here, right now. And the realtors called those people. I didn't have to use the extra $40,000, but we made a decision on the spot. And she was so relieved by that. And that taught me something, right? That taught me that there's times that you need to hold back and wait for a decision for a little bit. And then there's other times that you just need to act. So I did have a little bit of indecisiveness, I suppose, when I had a micromanager boss. But that was strictly out of fear for my job, and it was easy for me. I picked up the phone and I'm like, "Hey, boss, what do you want to do about this?" Right? And interestingly enough, my micromanager boss was also an indecisive boss. So generally, we would just sit there and wait, and something bad would happen, right? So speaking about that guy, I was days away from leaving that job when he finally quit. That was, I would say that was the most horrible time I've had in my entire career. And once again, I want to point out, and I'm going to say clearly, if indecisiveness is one of your issues, if you don't make a decision as a leader, I guarantee one is going to be made for you. And generally, it's not going to be the one that you approve of, because it's generally done in a rash manner by someone else, and they make it in the heat of battle. It may be good for that point in time, but it's not good for the long run. So something to combat this, right? A lot of times it's that people can't think in the moment. Once again, I don't have that problem much. But if you need time to think about things, simply tell the team that you need some space to think about the decision, and then give them a time when you're going to get back to it. And that's very important. You can't just say, hey, I need some space to think about this, and then keep them in the lurch for 3 weeks. All right, I'm going to wrap this thing up here. I hope that you gained some leadership insights from this episode. Remember, a combination of my wife and my words. When you know better, you must do better. And that time is now. So let's get out there. Let's flip those poor leadership attributes, flip them into positive ones, such as turning micromanagement into empowerment, lack of transparency to team engagement, inflexibility to being adaptable, from being selfish to being team-oriented, and indecisive to being a decision maker based off from good team input and suggestions. Now, I'm going to do something that I normally don't do, but I would love to hear your stories about combating poor leadership, either with someone that you worked for, someone you worked with, or your own. And I'd love to hear the transformation that you've seen out of any of those examples. And I challenge you to post those on one of my social media feeds. You can find any one of them at Fireforge Leader. So leaders, you have come here to listen to this message, but listening is not enough. What are you going to apply today, this week, this month, and this year? Remember, when you become a better leader, you become a better spouse. You become a better parent, a better coworker, and ultimately, that person that other people want to follow.
You have just experienced the heat and pressure of the forge. Remember, words without action are meaningless. Now, after the heat of the forge, shape your thoughts, quench your brain, then put your new tools to use, adding to your leadership. Tune in next week for more lessons from the forge.